Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Today I am joined with an interview with Chris Wheeler. Chris, thank you very much for coming on the channel.
Pleasure, Beth. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to get into all this Sir Jim rebuild financial stuff, and the main starting point and the whole topic that we've been speaking about recently is, will Erik Ten Hag survive Sir Jim's rebuild? We've been told that it's going to be brutal, nothing's off the table at the moment. Where do you think Erik Ten Hag's job security is at, and how much does Sir Jim want to change quickly?
I would have thought quick change. That's in no one's interest right now, because I don't know. It wouldn't be, I don't think, a good message to go and send out to come in and make quick change. But I saw Jamie Carragher of all people talking at the weekend about he's basically, you know, an interim manager now, dead man walking sort of thing. And I won't go that far, but I think 50-50 at the moment. It's been a poor season. You know, it hasn't gone to plan. Of course it hasn't. You know, you have to look at where we are in the table. You look at Europe. Yeah, with the number of losses so far, it's not good enough. You know, and so here we are in late Jan. I think we're at the stage now where Erik needs to go and kick on. He desperately needs to have Martinez back, Casemiro back, to have like Rashford firing, Anthony firing, to get something more out of this team. He needs something out of this team now. In the final few months of the season, he really needs to get top four, FA Cup run, of course. And even then we don't know, do we? But he needs to show more than he's shown in the first half of the season. And it was always, I think for any manager, when you've got new owners or part owners coming in, and you weren't their choice, I think you're always on quite thin ice. And he hasn't helped himself this season. And so I think where we are now, it's hanging in the balance and no guarantees at all.
Yeah, I can kind of gather that, and I think it's the next half of the season, like you say, is probably going to be one of the most pivotal points in Erik Ten Hag's Man United managerial career. If obviously he goes, you know, we could be looking back in this in a few years' time thinking, wow, we're so glad he kind of got through that and he's successful now. Or it could go even further downhill, which just isn't acceptable for Manchester. Well, where we're at now isn't acceptable for Manchester United, but it'll be interesting because, like you said, there was a lot of reports about Sir Jim being linked to Graham Potter because they tried to get him in the summer at Nice. INEOS, the word coming out is that they don't want to make any changes quickly. They want to veto everything. Yeah. So is that the page that you're on as well? Absolutely,
yeah. I think they are obviously in the building now. They have been for a month or two, looking at how things are. And I think you've got Dave Brailsford as very much Jim Ratcliffe's eyes and ears on the ground at Carrington and at Old Trafford. You've seen in the past week or two, Jim's had a bit of a charm offensive coming in, saying hi to everybody, the fans, the media, everybody else. So things are starting to get moving, but I don't sense at all from their point of view they want to rush into this. Quick change, kind of panic, makes no sense. They want to, I think, to be seen to be coming in to look at things and to make, you know, proper judgments. Against that, they haven't paid £1.3 billion to, you know, to go and do nothing. And INEOS, as a company, as a brand, they have been. You know, they're quite dynamic. They like to go and streamline. They don't like to carry a lot of excess staff. They are, you know, say good, but then they are quite effective at coming in and doing things their way. So I think change is coming. How much change? We'll have to wait and see.
Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about that, and Dave Brailsford's obviously going to be a key part of this project that they've basically taken on. But I wanted to get onto the financial side of things, because financial fair play has been such a big thing for Manchester United, and it's a big thing just generally in the footballing world at the moment. It's a big conversation. But when you look at Manchester United, we had reports coming out was record figures recently. But we're still in a very sticky situation when it comes to financial fair play. How does INEOS get money into this football club quickly, because all the other clubs look like they're gaining ground on us, and we have to catch up, but the money's not there right now?
I think the answer is that there is no quick fix. I think this has been a kind of slow burner over many years under the Glazers. You know, huge debt, paying off for that debt, you know, many millions. And even this week, of course, we've seen with the whole investment thing and Jim Ratcliffe playing out, we've seen behind the curtain what the figures are. You know, the $31 million paid to Ray, and the 180 to Joel Glazer, 4.5 to Ed Woodward, $2 million to Arnold. You know, there was money literally hemorrhaging out of this football club, and that needs to stop. And hopefully, you know, now this deal's going through and Jim Ratcliffe's in the door, that will stop. But there will be no quick fix. You know, it doesn't happen that way. This hasn't happened overnight. It won't be solved overnight. As you've seen, Everton, Nottingham Forest, you know, it's happening everywhere, you know, and Man United are no exception. I think we've become so used in English football to Manchester United having no reins, no holds barred. They can just do what they want to do. They go and spend, you know, like record transfers and buys all through their history. And for the first time, we are seeing now FFP bite. And I think last summer we saw it, even though, you know, Eric spent a chunk of money again. It was very much dictated by players going out, players coming in. Why didn't we go and get Harry Kane, for instance? And it's happening again right now, even more so because of the 28 million that they've lost through going out to Europe. Could be, I think 45 million pounds that could rise to. And again, in the summer, I think you will see it having an impact. And that's why I think now players are leaving. Some of the more fringe players are leaving on deals that are stacked in terms of the buybacks and then the kind of like sell-on clauses, all the rest of it. For the first time in a long time, Manchester United are having to be more accountable for what they spend and how they spend it.
And that's what I wanted to move on to in terms of, we could see for the first time in a very long time, some players that you'd expect to just hang around till the end of the contract maybe be pushed out of the door, especially under, like you said, they like to be streamlined under Sir Jim in this new project, because we need the money to invest it into the summer budget. Because, you know, there was a lot of talk about Sir Jim investing his own money into the club and injecting his own funds into boosting our transfer budget, but he can't just put all of his own money in and be like, we're going to spend a lot of money now, because you've got to kind of balance the book. So could you expect maybe in the summer for Manchester United to finally start maybe becoming more of a selling club in terms of assets?
Absolutely. I think nothing's off the table. I think, you know, I understand why some fans got seduced by the whole Qatari bid. It was, you know, it was Middle Eastern money coming in, awash with cash, and let's go and buy what we want. I think with INEOS, you are going to see a more business-like approach. And on that basis, I think you're seeing now, not only with the fringe players being offloaded, I think you're looking at the whole contract thing with Varane, possibly Casemiro coming as well, Martial on his way. The days of players just sat on big contracts, earning huge money for not doing nearly enough, I think are going to be going. And that's not a bad thing. And I think they will bring more accountability to the club, and money will be spent, hopefully far more sensibly, and better signings brought in on more, you know, more sane contracts than what we've seen over the past few years. Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of people obviously are a little bit on the fence about whether Varane will stay or go regarding his contract, but I think trying to minimise the wage structure in a way of not to the point where we never have any superstars at the club, because, you know, fans do get excited about them sort of players, but to be at a point where our wage structure is in order, I think as a fan, for me, is a good thing. But we have a super chat here from Mario Franco, a good one actually. It says, what would happen if Qatar proves that the club lied to the SEC? Will the Glazers or the club be punished? What are the consequences of this? A lot of talk about this the SEC files that are going around.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, who would have thought it after 14 months of cloak and dagger and cat and mouse? We didn't know what was going on. In theory, what's happened this week with the SEC was we were going to find out what really happened, and there it was in black and white. And in many ways, it's kind of thrown up as many questions as it's going to give us answers. Suddenly, it should have ended it, and then you're looking at this kind of all these documents and thinking, right, okay. Clearly, the Qataris aren't happy about how they've been portrayed. Absolutely right that there are rules in place about the statements you give to the SEC have to be truthful. In honesty, I don't know exactly what the punishments are if it's not truthful, but how do you prove it anyway? I mean, do you go to court? Does like Sheikh Jassim, you know, sue? Do they go to court and have this out there? I suspect that, you know, it's a natural response from the Qataris to what's being put out this week. I don't think it will go further. I think ultimately they will move on from this and accept that it didn't happen. I don't think it's in anyone's interest, not the Sheikh, not the club, not Jim Ratcliffe certainly, to be having to go through a long drawn-out process. Effectively, it comes down to they said, we said sort of thing, you know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's interesting this week that after all this time, we thought we'd get clarity, and we have, but not the clarity that we were hoping for, maybe.
It definitely wasn't the clarity that I was expecting. I mean, when I was looking through it, as an outsider, you can always look at it and think, wow, that's interesting. Oh, this explains this. But realistically, if that was chased up or followed up, it's not going to change the outcome of what's happening. And this, I mean, whether you wanted the full takeover with the Sheikh or you wanted Sir Jim Ratcliffe, like, we are on this path now with minority ownership with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and I think what we've got to do is kind of hope for the best in this situation that we're in. Absolutely,
it serves no purpose to go back over old ground now. What's there is there. I don't think the Qataris really want to follow this through. I can completely understand why the PR machine was behind their bid, would push back slightly against what's been said this week to the SEC. But I don't think it will go further than that. No, I think you're now seeing they will obviously fade away. Jim Ratcliffe is where he is. But you know, there are other questions, I think more pertinent questions coming out of what we've seen this week, and this idea of 18 months period, you know, after that the Glazers can sell completely to a different bidder. If they offer more, well, if Jim Ratcliffe can't match their bid, is a little bit worrying. We don't want all that again, do we? You know.
Because are we going to start this project and then move on to someone completely new?
That's the
But is Sir Jim taking that risk just because he wants to get his foot in the door?
That was always the problem with a minority, like buyout, is that it wasn't a complete takeover. You have now two different factions in control of this football club. How will that dynamic work? How does this now go and play out? Who's really in charge? You know, who pays for who decides over the future of the actual stadium? Who decides over the future of Carrington? You know, who decides over players being signed? If Joe Glazer doesn't want player A and Jim wants player B, what happens? You know, so there's an awful lot of questions being thrown up by this, not least the fact that in 18 months' time, effectively, anybody else, the Qataris, anybody can come back in again with a bid, and the Glazers can look at it with Jim Ratcliffe only has so much control over that.
And realistically as well, it's like, do you know, if that did happen and the Glazers got the price that they wanted, which obviously was extortionate, but somebody might come in and do that, Sir Jim has no control to stop that, and it's like we started this process and it can be a completely new project within 18 months. It's a risk, and all these questions, I'd love Sir Jim to do a sit-down interview, like talking about it all. I very highly doubt that'll go into all the detail, but it does pose a lot of questions, and you think, as fans, we could get behind this project and it could begin to be successful, and then the Glazers can throw another spanner in the works. And I suppose the fans would be very happy the Glazers would be finally leaving the club, but it's sort of catch-22 in that sense.
I think where we stand right now, Beth, is the hope for the fans is that what's happened this past month or two is the first step towards Jim Ratcliffe buying up, you know, all these like Class B shares and the Class A shares, of course, but it's the Class B ones that he really needs to get his hands on to end the Glazer rule, to end the majority that they have. I think the fans hope that this isn't the end, it's the actual start of it, and that Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS over time, you know, he was quite cute in how he put this, you know, how he kind of did this. He saw it, I think it was in July that he changed his stance from trying to buy the club to thinking, well, okay, if I put in a bid for a minority share, at least my foot's in the door, and once I'm in, I can then work from the inside out, you know. And so, and then that's everyone's hope now, is that this is kind of stage one, and in time, Jim Ratcliffe buys up all the shares and ends up being in complete control.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what people are hoping for, but also, you know, if Ratcliffe does begin to be successful with Manchester United with having control of the footballing side of things, why would the Glazers want to sell?
Exactly. It's a catch-22, isn't it? You know, that the more he does for the club, the more it's worth, the more the Glazers might look at keeping it or selling it to somebody else, you know. So, as I say, it's a very interesting dynamic and quite worrying too at the same time. This was always the problem, and I can understand why the fans, you know, favoured a complete buyout by the Sheikh, or, you know, as opposed to Jim Ratcliffe coming in and buying 25% of the club for £1.3 billion. You know, that was always the problem, is how does this dynamic play out beyond where we are now?
When does it become too many cooks in the kitchen? Akash Paul says, why would it stop now? Sir Jim is a minority investor. He doesn't control the finances. Whether we like it or not, Glazers still own 75%. And Fred said, we always hear about the world ruthless, but do we have any power and willingness to sell an underperforming Rashford? I mean, it's personal opinion from a fan there, but we will get into, you know, different players and how Ten Hag turns things around with certain players and the future of that. But I wanted to kind of move on to, obviously, when we talk about closing the gap, I mean, you look at Spurs' recruitment within the last 6 months, they've already now, like, within 6 months, jumped ahead of Manchester United. So obviously it is possible to maybe do it in a short period of time if you get things right, which Spurs have done. But like Spurs before last year looked completely below Manchester United. Now they look like they've gone way ahead of us. It's about getting the recruitment right, and in order to do so, you would suspect sporting directors, CEOs have to be appointed in the right way. Is this something that is looking to happen quite quickly, going ahead into the summer?
I think it has to. I think because it needs to change, obviously. I think over the last 10, 11 years, the recruitment's not been good enough, that's quite clear. And as you say, looking at Spurs, looking at Liverpool when Klopp first came in 2015, examples there of how quickly an underperforming club can actually turn around fairly quickly if you get the right people in. And looking, of course, at perhaps Don Ashworth coming in, Paul Mitchell's been mentioned, not just one, but maybe kind of two different roles. But it doesn't matter how many roles you have, you need the right people in those roles. And I think if they can do that, every chance, even in spite of FFP and the financial constraints, I think they can turn it around quite quickly. The right people in the right jobs, getting the right players in, it isn't that difficult, or it doesn't sound like it's that difficult, does it?
When they talk about being ruthless at the club, which it keeps coming out and having brutal changes, do you see the likes of, John Murtough, who's been there for so long, maybe being moved on? Like, do you think they will make them moves quite quickly?
Well, yeah, I think once we're beyond January, I think, as we head into, by the summer, they will want the right people in. It makes no sense to do it after the summer, of course, because you want to get that window right. The money was never going to be spent this month. So moving on John or moving him aside, it made no odds right now, because I think in January it was always going to be about getting players out, and mainly like fringe players out. The big money will be spent in the summer, and that's when you want the key people in the key jobs. So I think between now and the end of the season, you will see John Murtough no longer be in that role. John's a really good guy, and hopefully they find a spot for him within the new setup, but I wouldn't envisage John Murtough being the football director, certainly not by June, put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's something that really does need to happen quickly. And I always say on this channel, I'm never an advocate of wanting someone to lose the job, because obviously these are people at the end of the day. But for what's best at Manchester United, we need the best people in charge.
Absolutely.
And we talk about cost cutting and getting money into the football club quickly. How have you heard that they plan to do this? Will it be based on wages and players leaving? Is that how it's going to happen?
I don't think so, no, because obviously the best players tend to earn the most wages, and just you can't go and sell the best players. But we spoke before, didn't we, Beth, about wages and how it's been this season. And there were periods in the past few weeks even when you had Jadon Sancho training on his own, Anthony Martial being ill, doing what he's doing. I don't know what he's doing right now, but doing whatever he is doing right now. And you had, of course, a bit of a standoff between Eric and Varane. You had, £1 million worth of players in terms of wages. You're paying these three guys £1 million a week in total to do what? And that is chronic waste on a grand scale, and you can't be doing that. So I think they will look at, the wages that they've got to, but within obviously the context of how good these players are doing, it makes no sense to just get rid of all your best players. But I think when you're looking at Varane, he's in his 30s now, his knees mean that he can't always train. There's been an issue, of course, between him and Eric in the past months. Do you keep him on? Casemiro this season isn't the Casemiro of last season. Again, huge wages in the like 300s. What do you do with him? And the caller there mentioned about Marcus Rashford now earning, at 300 plus and not performing to that level. So I think these players have to be accountable for the wages that they're earning. And if they're not doing it and they won't take a pay cut, then it's time to move on,
I think hopefully we're going into an era where accountability will come under question, because we've been in an era for so long at Manchester United that players are allowed to underperform on huge wages and they'll just stay at the club. And there's certain players and staff members as well that a lot of people just consider untouchable no matter what they do. And I think Rashford always comes into this bracket just because of obviously his stature and he's obviously he's basically the face of the club and through the academy. But you would never Manchester United would never dream of selling Marcus Rashford, and I'm not saying we should, but what I'm saying is nothing should ever be off the table if players are underperforming. Absolutely.
It's always a concern to me when a player plays fantastically, gets a big new contract and then stops playing well. You're thinking, well, what's going on there? And great example of why Fergie used to try and build deals so that the young players, they were incentivised towards the end of the contracts rather than the start of them. He knew what he was talking about. And I think as a club now, I quite like the fact that we are selling off fringe players, you know, who just getting stockpiled, you know, and the argument was that for every Iqbal that you keep on, you're stopping a Mainu from coming through, you know, and that's the problem. So move these guys on, let them have a career somewhere else, make some money out of them. Don't be afraid of that, because as a club, we've always been so precious, and quite rightly so, about the academy and young players coming through. Don't be afraid to let young players go. Don't be afraid, if stars aren't performing, to let them go. I think it's time that as a club we need to be looking at that, and it goes across the board, yeah, and not just the kind of players either. I think you see INEOS coming in now, and they'll look at the staff. Unfortunately, there will be, I think, staff cuts. I think 1,200 employees is way above the any other Premier League club. You know, we do carry a big staff at this football club, you know, and so
and
I think,
we're massively underperforming.
Well, this is it, you know, and I'm not, you know, it's sad for anybody losing their job or players, you know, being like sold on if they don't want to go and move and all the rest of it. But I think if you are going to move forward as a club, meet FFP and be a success in the future, that you do have to be quite ruthless. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I agree. I think to be the best of the best, you have to have a really ruthless environment. Get my words out. I have to have a ruthless environment, but you also have to. Everybody has to know that. You know, they always have to be conscious of they have to be improving, they have to be on the best. And I don't think that's been the case at Manchester United for so long. Everyone's been very, very comfortable, and I think that's why you've seen, one of the reasons why you've seen a massive drop-off. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons. But we heard, it was just coming out from the MEN a little bit ago, just before we went live, that West Ham and Crystal Palace have both inquired about Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now, this is an interesting one, because we were speaking a little bit about contract extensions and, you know, new contracts, and Wan-Bissaka keeps coming up. Also, potentially as part of a swap deal for Elise in the summer. That's another one that keeps getting put out into the news. Wan-Bissaka's always been linked with a move away since Ten Hag came in, really. Do you think this is a player that you could see United cashing in on?
Yeah, I think so. And we spoke earlier, didn't we? And you look at the defence now, that entire unit, and you look for different reasons, but you look at Wan-Bissaka, you look at Dalot, look at Lindelof, all players that you feel could probably, you know, be moved on at some stage, and you wouldn't, as long as someone comes in, of course, that you wouldn't lose that much quality, you know. And then you've got, you know, maybe Varane with his age and his fitness, you know. There's a number of different issues there, but I think for Wan-Bissaka, like you say, there's been a lot of talk around him. I think it's interesting. I think he thought he was going to get a new contract before the end of the year. Didn't happen. He got the extension, which, as we talked about earlier, can mean a number of different things. It can mean that you want to keep a player, you want to sell a player and, you know, get the biggest price for him, or you just want to make up your mind at some stage, you know. And I think with him, it's probably the latter, that they're waiting to see. But I don't think Eric's convinced by him, no. I think that there's been a lot of talk around him. I mean, £50 million, I've never seen that value in him when I watch him play. And yeah, there's been a lot of talk about going back to Palace, either, you know, get sold back as some kind of deal as a make weight for Elise and West Ham now. Yeah, I mean, who knows? But every chance, I think, more so in the summer, I think the Wan-Bissaka could possibly go and move on. Yeah.
We will talk a little bit about the summer, but first of all, let's talk about this January. I mean, most people are very convinced that Man United not going to do anything really this January transfer window, and are just kind of getting all the ducks in a row for the summer. What have you heard about this January transfer window? Is it that Man United won't do anything? Obviously, we had the reports that Martial was training alone because of fitness reasons. Then his agent came out and said, no, it's because he needs an operation that he's going to have. That, for me, stops Martial leaving. There was talks about us getting a striker on loan. I mean, do you think Man United could do like a loan for a striker, or do you think there'll be nothing?
Possibly. First of all, yeah, absolutely right. All the noises that we've been hearing, same as you, is that it's going to be quite a quiet window. Players out more than players in. I still think maybe INEOS and Sir Jim Ratcliffe might want to, I don't know, not make a statement signing, but do something, you know, bring in one player at least, so it's not an entirely one way this this January. But as you say, Beth, yeah, I mean, I think strikers are one that's really crying out to. I mean, we saw in the last game at last Rashford and Højlund scoring in the same game, helping each other a little bit. You know, after how many months now? 4 or 5 months, finally seeing the kind of start of a partnership there, hopefully. But it hasn't done what the club hoped it was going to do. Those two players haven't gelled. The goal output from our forwards is absolutely woeful, you know, and that's been one of many reasons why the first half of the season's not been all that, you know. But I think if there's anything that the club is crying out for this month, it's to get a striker in, you know, somebody to go and help Højlund, because I think it was always a little bit ill-advised to bring in someone that young and to effectively let him shoulder the burden, because Martial was his track record shows that he was never going to be that guy, you know. And so Højlund is coming in, big transfer fee, 20 years old. I think he's had to go and shoulder far too much, and that can't help his development at all, you know. And you need someone to go and help him out. And hopefully, still, irrespective of what happens with Anthony Martial and his future this month, I'd like to see maybe them get one striker in, yeah.
Yeah, I think deadline day could be a thing. I mean, is there any names at all that are being kind of touted around? I know that we were linked to Werner, but then he went to Spurs. Choupo-Moting's one that kind of
was one, yeah,
came up, but I can't think of anybody else really.
No, but I mean, obviously the Benzema thing came out at the weekend. That would have been mad, because as much as it might appeal to the fans and you think, oh wow, I think the wind, the way it's blowing at the moment, is not to go that route. You know, having signed Varane, having signed Casemiro, ex-Madrid players on, you know, in their 30s on massive wages, I think the club's decided that's not the way forward. So to go and sign Benzema, you know, would probably not be the way to go. I don't know. I mean, number 9s who can score goals, they're like gold dust, you know, and that's the problem. That's what the problem that the club had back in the summer. There was this issue with Kane and Højlund, Osimhen, you know, only 4 or 5 strikers that were moving around Europe, and everybody was after the same players. And that's ultimately why Man United paid £72 million for Højlund, because they do come at a premium.
Do you think that it would absolutely have to be a loan in January, or do you think there is a chance of maybe a very cheap player on a permanent basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, loan, short-term deals. Would you want a longer-term deal? Because January always smacks of panic. You know, if you need to go out and get a striker in January, either it's because someone's got injured or because you didn't plan well from the start. I think with Man United's case, it was the latter. It wasn't great planning. They did need 2 strikers. They should really have moved Anthony Martial on last summer. I mean, as I said before, his track record shows that he was probably not going to, you know, finally after 8-9 years come good at this point. You know, it was really time to go last summer and get somebody else in. It didn't happen, and now we are where we are. I'd have thought probably loan or short-term deal, but for me, that's probably the best outcome anyway.
Yes, I agree in the sense of I think I would rather us just get ourselves sorted, and this season it's not as if we're really fighting for anything anyway. I don't see us getting top 4 personally, and obviously the FA Cup, but realistically I think Ten Hag gets the rest of the season to show something. We go into the summer, hopefully it's a completely new direction, we spend smarter, we get a good transfer window under our belts, and then we can kind of crack on to next season. But Ronnie Dodger says, under Sir Jim, we need to spend smarter. Well, absolutely, because the way that we've been spending is just, I mean, I saw something in the Daily Mail actually about the last decade of each summer transfer window, and I couldn't believe how many flops had been. Like, it's so rare that you see a successful one in there. Like, Bruno was probably the only, well, that was a January transfer window. Looking at summer transfer windows, they have been so poor in the long term for Manchester United. But looking towards the summer, there has been a lot of talk that there's going to be a centre-back overhaul. Is that something that you can see happening as well? Yeah,
I think so. I think that would make complete sense. I mentioned before, Varane, age, wages, knees, none of it really augurs well for the future. Plus the issue that he's had with Ten Hag. Lindelof, he came in, £30 million from Benfica, been there about 5 years now. Again, I put him in the same bracket as Dalot and Wan-Bissaka. He's someone that could be moved on. I don't think you'd lose too much by doing that. And of course, you've then got Maguire, who I've been a big fan of Harry Maguire's. I think it was very unfortunate how things went against him, and I was really pleased to see him come back and do what he's done this season. But for me, nothing's changed. Harry Maguire is what he is. He was never brilliant. He was never awful. He's always been. He does what he's always done, and in the right team, in the right system, he's great. But I think Eric wants something out of his centre backs that Harry can't necessarily give, and I still think it's for the best for both him and for the club if he moves on. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that you could move on Maguire, you could move on Varane, you could move on Lindelof and bring in some new blood, definitely. Yeah.
There's been this rumour going around that Sir Jim, Dave Brailsford, INEOS want to go down the route in recruitment of a Premier League proven, even British core, something that, obviously when it comes up, Branthwaite is someone we've been linked to as a centre back. Premier League proven, Elise at Crystal Palace is a big one we keep getting linked to. Is that something that you've heard as well?
Yeah, and it would make sense. I mean, I'm not sure about British. I wouldn't mind either way there, but I think that if you can have someone who is Premier League proven, who can come in and from day one knows the system, knows the kind of the ground, knows the kind of outlook in the Premier League. That's why I thought, for me, Harry Kane was a complete no-brainer. Back
me
in the
too.
I mean, I go on about this one, but I understand it was a wages issue as well, and I get it, and it's gone, fair enough. But for me, having a striker who knew the Premier League so well and could come in and from day one score goals was absolute gold. And that's not against Højlund, but it's asking a hell of a lot of a 20-year-old guy, who's played in Denmark, in Italy, and Austria, to come into the Premier League, the best league in the world, and to perform at the level that we needed. And understandably, he's fallen a little bit short of that. But to have players who can come in with Premier League knowledge and know the league, know the opponents, know the teams, know the stadiums, I think makes complete sense. Yeah.
Akash Pauls says, does Sancho have a future at Man United?
No. No, I mean, listen, if Ten Hag was to be sacked, and that's not impossible at all, could INEOS take a different view about Sancho and say, look, it didn't work out between him and Eric. Eric's now gone. Bring him back and see how we go. I guess that would be down to any new coach coming in, and of course football director and so on and so forth. So never say never. But it does feel like the Sancho thing sort of is run its course. You mentioned earlier about bad signings or how things have worked out, and you look back at Sancho and right wingers, Sanchez too, of course. I mean, there's been some pretty bad signings.
Right wing spot has been it's been a horror show for Man United.
Mason Greenwood, Anthony, it goes on and on. So it's with Sancho, it didn't work out. It feels like it's sort of done. It's best that he moves on and plays somewhere else. But yeah, to answer the question, is it possible? It's not impossible, but I'd be surprised.
The one thing I would say, which, to be fair to Manchester United, hopefully this works out, but previously when we've made terrible signings and put them on massive contracts, it's been so hard to get them off the books.
Yeah.
So hard. But with Sancho going back to Dortmund, okay, yeah, we are paying a lot of his wage still, and financially it's not great now, but if he does perform, that could bring buyers in the summer for us to actually get him off the books quickly and not have it as bad as it could have been.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not great, you're paying $100,000 a week for a guy to play for somebody else. But against that, that's better than having him sat training on his own, eating his packed lunch around the corner. He can't be with his teammates. You're paying him $275, which is an awful lot more, and no one can see him. Was
that a reduced wage because of disciplinary reasons?
No, I don't think so. No. I mean, he's always earned the full whack.
Has it?
Yeah. Because it was a personal fallout with Eric. He hadn't broken any rules. He hadn't done anything wrong as such in the eyes of the club. It was purely a personal issue with him and Eric. So there was no grounds whatsoever for the club to go and punish him, fine him, anything like that. So he's been earning full wages training on his own where no one can see him, it makes far more sense to have him at Dortmund, back where he's happy, in the shop window. They're paying 2/3 of his wages. It makes far more sense. And I'd say hopefully it all works out well. You know, he does well at Dortmund. Man United get a transfer fee in the summer. He's off the wages, and everyone moves on. To answer the question again, is it impossible he comes back? No, it's not impossible, but I think at this stage it does feel like that chapter's closed. Yeah.
The one thing I would say about talking about Erik Ten Hag is obviously he's come under criticism for his style of play, the results, and it is a results-based business. Yeah. But the one thing that I can see a difference in under this manager, and it's very small, like glimmers of hope, is the culture. And the standards in terms of attitude and in terms of, you know, being on time and work ethic, everything like that. Is that kind of being shown across the club? Is Erik a manager that's actually really getting maybe control of the players for once?
It felt so last season. So many things felt right last season. So many things went right last season. And this season it felt like the wheels began to come off. And the culture, or the better culture, is meant to be there. The discipline's meant to be there, and yet Sancho happened. And you're looking at Rashford and thinking, something's not right there. What's going on with Marcus Rashford? Something's not right there.
Body language on the pitch as well.
It's, you know, the Varane thing, he's fallen out with Varane as well. And you look at that and you're thinking, is it because he's fighting a bit of a losing battle? You know, is it because a manager, when he starts to lose games, loses that traction, loses that ability to impose himself in a way that he can when things are going really well? Absolutely. I think he was brought in, Erik, to improve the culture. He has done that, but it's a hell of a job, and it's one that won't happen overnight. And it went well first season. It's not gone so well second season. For me, the concern about Erik at the moment is of course, the fact that the team's losing so many games, but also the identity. What is this team? What is the modern day Manchester United? You know, what are we playing? What's the plan? You know, you look at other teams and how quickly coaches go in, whether it's Postecoglou, whether it's De Zerbi, the coaches go in and they stamp their mark on these teams, and immediately you see what they're all about. It feels like the longer it goes on with Erik Ten Hag, the more kind of blurred it becomes in terms of what is this team? What are we doing? And that, for me, is the biggest worry, that you look at it now and you think, we're not winning games, and we're also not really clear in where we're at. And I mentioned earlier, he can't get Martinez and Casemiro back soon enough. Hopefully, the two players that were there last season, not this season, because they were absolute giants for him last season. He needs them in there to give the team a little bit more structure, a little bit more strength and solidity, and hopefully things can build from there. But time's running out for him. You know, time is running out now.
It's interesting as well because he explained his style of play in a press conference earlier this season, but you barely see it. Like, you see glimmers here and there. And I also think to myself, has he decided to change like multiple times because he doesn't think the players can do what he's asking? But then I don't know, because you need to stick to something and really kind of progress it. It's interesting. Someone said here he's got the right mindset but no style of play and identity, and you look at it and you think, even what he's doing behind the scenes in terms of, he talks about setting standards in the culture, we're not reaping the rewards for it on the pitch because we're losing games. And it's an interesting one. Like you said, time is definitely ticking, I think. But want to move on a little bit of what Gary Neville said here. He said that he believes that toxicity that exists at the club eats every manager alive and player that comes here. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So what I mentioned before is that, you know, Erik imposed his culture in his first season. Things went well, and when it's going well, everything kind of comes from that. If you've got a winning team, everything comes from that. Second season hasn't gone well, and probably no surprise that when you get that and the coach suddenly is under some pressure, that the players maybe sense that, and they sense a weakness, and the culture begins to go and slip slightly. And he's absolutely right. You can't keep sacking managers and thinking that it will bring about change, when quite clearly it's not just the manager's fault. It isn't just, you know, David Moyes. It's not just Louis van Gaal, Jose Mourinho. You can't just keep pinning it on the manager, sacking him and thinking that things are going to change. There is something fundamentally wrong in that dressing room with the players, the mindset, that needs to be sorted out. And that's where we go back to the start of our conversation with Beth and INEOS and Jim Ratcliffe, and it's not a quick fix, it's not an overnight thing. It's a root and branch, it's a fundamental getting to the heart of what's wrong with this football club, with the mindset, with the players, with the wages, with the contracts, everything. It needs a lot of work. At the end of all of that, is Erik Ten Hag still the guy to go and take the club forward? I don't know, but you can't just pin it on him and go and sack him and expect change.
I completely agree with you in that. I think there's a loser's mentality that runs deep throughout the club, not even just in the dressing room, just like through the club. And you look at it and it's like even really bright talents that we have signed, they come in and then you start to see them get wore down by Manchester United. 100%. I mean, look at Bruno when he first walked through the door, and I still think Bruno's a great player, but you would have, like, the way he's gone, I feel like you would have expected, even he's so good, but you would expect even more from him. And now, you know, certain sections of the fan base are on his back a little bit. I mean, I thought Mason Mount was a good signing when he came in. I can't see where he fits into Erik Ten Hag's team. There's players, I mean, Sancho's one. I thought he was going to come in and do really well. Came in and just been poor. So not only has recruitment been bad, but the way we kind of, you know, take these players on the journey as a Man United player is poor as well. But like you said, there's so many root issues. Well,
the thing is that you sign players in the hope that they raise a team. And what's happening, as you say, is we sign them and then we drag them down.
Yeah.
And so no matter how good you are, we will take you down inside. And I mean, I hate saying it, but you look across town at Man City, the complete opposite. You have a team there that's well run, that's winning. And what Pep Guardiola can do is he can bring in individual players, young players or guys that he's just signed, and drop them into that team. And almost invariably, whether it's a Foden years ago when he was giving him game time and getting him involved, right through now to Bob or Doku, who he signed, you know, I don't think, you know, that these players are necessarily that much better than the players in the Man United squad. That much better, by the way. But the fact they can come into a winning team with a winning mentality and a coach who's in total control, it's what Fergie had for years. You know, that when things are going your way, when you have that winning formula, tweaking it with one or two players every single year works wonders. It's a fantastic system. When it's gone the other way and you're signing players expecting them to come in and somehow change the culture or lift the team on their own, it's asking too much.
Yeah, there's so much that needs to be done, like you said, and how quickly can Sergium do it is a big question. One thing I wanted to ask you about is Roy Keane's been quite vocal criticising Bruno Fernandes' captaincy. Bruno's a very divisive topic within the fan base and just within football in general. But what do you think about Roy Keane's comments in terms of that? Because Erik Ten Hag clearly absolutely loves the player because he plays every single minute for him.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed for the last half hour, haven't we, Beth, the problems at Manchester United. And there are a multitude of problems at the club. For me, if you did a league table of problems, I don't think that Bruno would be high on the list.
Not at all.
You know, he's obviously been a hugely important player. You know, you look at, I think, did I read before that this season he's been involved in more goals than any other player in the Premier League or something like that. You know, his assists and goals since coming in, is exceptional. You know, and as I say, if I was looking to put things right at the club, Bruno wouldn't be top of the list. But you have to respect what Roy says. He's obviously been in that position, both as captain and playing in a similar kind of role, not quite as far forward, of course. And where I think what I do find interesting about Roy's comments is the fact that he's identified with Bruno that he does roam a lot, and as a player like Roy Keane, maybe appreciates what problems that causes for your teammates, whether you're Casemiro, McTominay, Kobe Mainu, you know, that if you have a guy that goes walkabout, he might be getting the glory, getting the goals, getting the assists, but you don't realise perhaps as a fan that he's then leaving his post and leaving his teammates exposed. And so that's, for me, on a kind of tactical point of view, that for me is very interesting that, yes, Bruno brings so much to the table in terms of goals and opportunities and all the rest of it, but you also need to do a fundamental job. And I remember, I'm trying to think back now, was it might have been Galatasaray when the 2 free kicks that they scored from, both of them given away by Bruno close to his own goal. You know, there has to be, for all the creativity he brings to the table, there has to be, as a midfielder and a captain, a certain amount of accountability and defensive know-how, you know. And so that I give more kind of kudos to in terms of answering about Bruno than I do about him being a major problem or his captaincy, which, as you say, is quite divisive, but, you know, I think there are bigger issues.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the captaincy, Bruno, everyone's got so many different opinions. He spoke in press conferences saying he knows, like, you know, he's not perfect, but this is the way he does things, and the manager obviously trusts him, and he's been such a key player for us for so much, since he walked into the football club. And I think the issue with Bruno for me is that we rely on him way too much. Yeah. So if he isn't playing well, it's, you know, the target goes on Bruno's back because we rely on him so much to play as a team. He's such a big part of the team, and realistically it's about the 11 players on the pitch. But like you said, my dad's always said this to me. My dad likes Bruno Fernandes, but he says he doesn't understand why Ollie hasn't done it, why Ten Hag's not done it, and said, look, you're going too much. Like there's a point where you can be doing too much, and like you said, it leaves gaps within the team. But maybe for me, the manager maybe needs to step in and do something about that. But like you said, when you look at issues at Manchester United, for me, it's towards bottom of the pile. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think it's probably gone now, but I think the point was when they gave him the captaincy to maybe look to somebody else. I think Bruno's the kind of player who'll be a leader, whatever. Doesn't need the armband to be a leader. I think you could have gone for somebody a little bit more stable, maybe. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But someone because
he's so like
not so emotional.
Yeah. I like that about him though, and some
absolutely.
people don't.
You can keep that because he'll be a leader anyway.
Yeah.
But give the armband to somebody else, a little bit quieter, who a more steadying presence, and let Bruno go and be Bruno, both in terms of how he plays and how he acts. He won't change because of the armband. But having given it to him now, it's a little bit difficult to want to take it off him because that would be a very negative move, I think. So in terms of that debate, I think he's staying as captain certainly as long as Erik Ten Hag's in charge.
Absolutely, I think he will, and I don't think he's a problem, but some people do, and I can understand why they don't enjoy the way he plays. It's, you know, because recently it has been poor, but then a lot of the team is as well. It's an interesting topic, and then that leads me on to, obviously, you talk about how there was the main thing that comes out of the club is there wasn't the money to buy Harry Kane, and then people say, well, you spent 70 odd on Rasmus, who I think is going to be a top player. I really do think he has the attributes for it. You spent 40 on Onana, you spent 60 on Mason Mount. Like, there was the money there if you would have, like, people ask, why did we need Mason Mount?
Yeah, that's the one that hurts.
And I want to ask you about it, because what is Mount's role at Manchester United? Because, of course, he's a quality player. Like, he was wanted at lots of different teams in the summer. So why did he choose to come to Manchester United? Like, what did Erik Ten Hag say to him his position was going to be, do you think?
I'm not sure. From the club's point of view, I know for a fact they viewed the Mount deal as a now or never deal. It was more a case of not we need Mason Mount, more a case of Mason Mount is coming available, he's got a year left on his contract. If he signs a new one, we're never going to get him, so let's move now. Still, I think £60 million is a lot of money, particularly in a summer when FFP is biting hard. Even more so when, as you say, the Harry Kane margins from Højlund to Kane wasn't, that far in the end. When they first looked at Højlund, it was 30 or 40 million.
That's what I thought it was going to be.
It was, but they thought that, and it became 72. And for me, when you reach 72, that up to Kane and the wages is effectively, well, the Mount deal will cover that and then some.
So would you say Mount was more of a club signing than a Ten Hag signing then?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was. And so to answer your question about where he fits in, I don't know. I mean, going back to Bruno again, Bruno I think is better at number 10 than he is out on the right, and he's definitely better at number 10 than he is playing deeper. So if you accept that your captain and best player is going to play number 10, where does Mason Mount play? I don't think he's defensively good enough to play deep. So effectively, you're talking one of the wide positions. And you've got so many wingers. You've got Rashford, you've got Garnacho, you've got Ahmad now, you've got Anthony, you've got Pellistri, of course, he's going to go out on loan. But I mean, you have a lot of wide players there. You've got Casemiro coming back for the pivot. Yeah, so where does he fit in? I don't know. And I don't think anyone's known since day one. That was a problem.
Do you think, here's one for you, do you think with Mason Mount coming in, obviously, like you said, club said now or never, they signed him. Do you think Erik Ten Hag, maybe like other managers have done in the past when the club have made signings, felt like he maybe had to try and fit him in?
Possibly. I mean, don't forget, any great team should have 2 players for each spot anyway. So you can't just have one number 10. Eriksen played there as well for me. Eriksen's not the force that he once was. And so I don't think having Mount and Bruno as alternates at number 10 is the worst thing. But that obviously would involve not playing Bruno in some games, you know. So I don't know. I think from day one when Mason Mount came in, everyone said, well, why and how, and you know, how's this going to work? And £60 million at a time when, you know, FFP is having a big impact felt like a bit of a wrong turn. And what we're now 7 months in, and it still feels like a bit of a wrong turn. Hopefully things will. He's quite a young player. He's obviously a very good player. You know, there's no question about that. And £60 million, year left in his contract. Okay, it's a little bit toppy, but you've got him in. I think Mason Mount can still work. I think that it's not a deal that I've got less of an issue about Mason Mount at 60 than I have at Anthony at 85. Put it that way.
Me too, because I think the one thing I would say about Mount is I think he's a quality player, and he's young. He's still, I think he's 24, 25, might be 25 now.
Yeah.
So I honestly think he's a good player, and I was happy when we signed him. But the only thing is now, when you look at it, you think, where does he fit into Man United's team? Because, like I said, like, you know, his position is Bruno's position, and Bruno is the captain, and Ten Hag, you know, is probably the first name on the team sheet. So it's an interesting one how it is going to work. I hope it does work because I like him, and you know, you want these signings to pay off. But it will be interesting. It will be.
You would hope that across, if you get a second striker in, you've got Højlund and another striker up top. In those 3 positions behind the striker, you would hope out of a group of, you know, Rashford if he comes good or keeps trying to improve, Garnacho, Bruno, and then Mount, you know, maybe he becomes that 4th one. You know, what then becomes of Anthony and Ahmad, I don't know. But for me, Mount could still break into that group. So from game to game, those 3 slots go to 3 of that group of 4 or 5 players.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is, obviously, you know, Ten Hag's had some hits and he's had some misses in terms of signings. INEOS obviously wanting to take a different approach. Do you think he will have less control maybe in the summer if he's still in the job when it comes to who Manchester United go out and sign?
I hope so, is the answer. I think one of the negatives against Erik Ten Hag in his first couple of seasons is the sheer amount of Dutch players or kind of Dutch-based players who've come in. As you say, some hits, some misses. You know, for every Martinez, you've got an Anthony. You know, and so it concerns me that, you know, on the one hand, it sort of makes sense that you would go with what you know, but we've seen even before Eric came in with Van der Beek that just because you're good at Ajax and good in Holland doesn't necessarily follow that you're going to come and be good at Man United. And so I think this needs to stop, this idea of, you know, if you haven't played in Holland, then it's going to be tough for you. Because so many, you know, they got Andre Onana from Inter Milan, but I mean, he obviously played for him at Ajax. You got Martinez, who's Argentinian, but he played for him at Ajax. You got Malacia, you know, you got Eriksen even, who've been training at Ajax. So they need to move away from that. You know, of course, there's been talk about SEG as well. We probably can't get into that too much, but, you know, maybe influence from Erik Ten Hag's agents and everything. But I think as a club, they need to get back that control and power where they sign the players. They have people, whether it's a Ashworth or a Paul Mitchell, who can drive that. And the coach is the coach. You know, he has his veto still. He's involved in that process. But I think under Ten Hag, you've seen a bit of a shift away from that 50-50 veto club and the coach to the coach and his agent having too much sway. And I think that has to change. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Obviously, there was a lot talked about his agency being involved potentially, and you'd like to think that isn't the case, really. You know, it's such a huge job. But
I'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But I mean, there's an awful lot of smoke, you know. So I think SEG have had too much sway, and I think that has to change now. I think that will change now. I can't imagine a businessman like Jim Ratcliffe and an operator like Dave Brailsford coming into Manchester United will put up with that. I think they will. I think they will. You know, without wishing it, there's no pointing of our fingers here. There's been no wrongdoing, but it's a case of power. It's a case of control, and the club, I think, should have the majority of that control with the manager having an input. But I think that will change most definitely. Yeah.
It's even signings who missed out on like Gakpo and stuff. They were all part of that kind of circle. So it is an interesting situation, and I agree with you. We need to move away. Like you look at the Peps and the Klopps, and have they really brought anyone in that they've managed before? Minus maybe one or two. No,
but even Pep Guardiola, you know, he is obviously if anyone should have complete control, like someone like him, but he hasn't got complete control. No. He is one cog in a much bigger machine, and he can't dictate to Man City who they buy and don't buy.
You speak about Mitchell and Ashworth there. Do you think it will be one of them or both?
I think it sounds though Ashworth's getting a very strong shout. So Ashworth, I think, at the moment, as we sit here now, Beth, I think Ashworth is favourite to get a slot, get a job. And the feeling is there'll be more than one, that they will look not only to have a Dan Ashworth in as maybe a football director, but you'd have someone in as kind of technical director, not so much like Darren Fletcher, I think will maybe revert more to the training ground sort of job. But maybe getting two people. But again, that's what Brailsford and INEOS bring to the table. I think Dave Brailsford holds up his hands and says, look, I'm no football expert here, but what his background is in getting best in class.
Getting experts for the jobs.
He will delegate and say, we want, you know, and it's, again, go back to what I said, it's not rocket science. You know, get the best people in the right jobs, you know, that, you know, for a club like Man United, that shouldn't be too hard. I think that's what he will do. I think Brailsford will look and listen for the next few weeks, and then you'll start to see changes, and you'll see people coming in, and hopefully they'll be the right people, and from that will become brighter, better times, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Last but not least, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what did you make of, there's been a lot of talk about this, what did you make of the Rashford celebration? When he scored at Old Trafford, obviously, the talking one. I mean, do you think maybe too much talk on that, or do you think?
I mean, I did a colour piece that day from the game and mentioned that, and for me it was quite clear he was just having a go back at the people who'd had a go at him for liking the Sancho post, and it all gets a bit social media, I don't know, but again, indicative of where he's at. You know, last season there was the kind of fourth finger to the temple. It was the zoning out. I'm not listening to all the noise, and that's the Marcus Rashford we need to be seeing. Who'll shut out all the noise, play his football, do what he's paid to do, score goals, win games. That's what you want from Marcus Rashford. The moment you start in kind of engaging with your critics and giving it all this, he doesn't need that. And also, he's not playing well enough to be doing that right now. I go back to Harry Maguire. I think when he scored for England and did the old fingers in the ears and stuff, it's like, no, you've just scored one goal. You know, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. These players, they're going to get criticised. It's part of their jobs. It's part of the landscape. And I think they need to just do what he was doing last season, finger to the temple, shut the noise out, and do what you're paid to do, because you're very good at it, you know, when you're doing it well. And, you know, this club needs Marcus Rashford scoring goals and, you know, not getting involved in that kind of stuff.
And lastly, there was a little bit of talk, I just wanted to kind of get your say on it, about INEOS and Sir Jim potentially scouting out golf courses for a new training ground. I mean, did you see about that? Is there
in the Daily
truth?
Mail? Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think, you know, for me, Carrington isn't the worst place in the world. You know, I mean, it's a decent training facility. But it's
tell you what, I'd like to have a go in that gym.
Exactly.
You know, I was like, can I have a day
play
pass?
on those pitches? I mean, we stood on the touchline there, haven't we, and watched them train. I've never in my life played on a pitch as good as that. You know, so no excuses for getting the ball wrong there. But it's good that the club are still thinking big. You know, both for Old Trafford and for Carrington. You know, that it's possible they could look at moving out. If they did, they'll obviously probably keep what they've got right now for the academy, for the women's team, having spent £7 million, of course, in this past 6 months on the new building there. So, yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible, you know, things could happen. At the moment, I think they'll be focused on what's there, but I think it's completely understandable and right that as a club, you've got to keep looking to the future. You've got to keep thinking big. And if that means moving out and going somewhere bigger and better, so be it, because Fergie was so proud of Carrington when we first built it. And it's amazing, you think, the years have passed. In that time, you know, like Man City have built the, you know, CFA, and even Leicester, you know.
Leicester's insane, isn't it?
And we've got the person that did that has come in now to look at Carrington. So other clubs are overtaken. In football moves very, very quickly. And what was a real source of pride for Fergie many, many years ago, it's been overtaken. And it's not that bad, but it's not the best anymore.
It's not the best of the best, and we want to be the best of the best.
You have to think big. You've got to think big.
Would that affect our financial fair play in terms of transfer budget, though?
On the training facility, I think they're looking more long term than that.
Okay.
I think, you know, these things run kind of like parallel in terms of, as a club, you know, yes, you're buying players, but you also have to look at the stadium, you've got to look at the training ground. So I don't think that would, you know, all these things come from the same pot. Money's money. But I think it's important that you think big and that you want the best. I think that's what all of us want for the football club.
Yes, I am completely in agreement. It's been a great show, Chris. There's just one last super chat from James M saying, do you think Sir Jim will bring Mason Greenwood back? We spoke about that the other day. I mean, that's one for the end of the season, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned Sancho before. Could he come back? You know, Mason Greenwood, could he come back? It's a fresh pair of eyes on this now. You know, it's very interesting, you know, because clearly the old regime, Arnold's now gone. You know, they did what they did. It was a little bit cat-handed. Wasn't handled very well. What happened. But, you know, again, Mason Greenwood has not been found guilty of any crime. He is a young footballer and a damn good footballer. And he's currently playing at Getafe. Again, makes sense to have him out playing, same as Sancho. You're paying him anyway, so best to have him, you know, like playing some football. Is time a healer? You know, will people, you know, forgive and forget, or will they face the same storm? If he comes back in the summer, will INEOS face all the same missiles that came the way of Arnold? And they, you know, no one knows, but clearly that is a hot potato that's coming back their way in about 5 months' time. Yeah.
There's a lot of decisions to make in the summer. There's a lot of decisions. It's gonna be, I mean, to sit back and watch what happens, and when INEOS and Sir Jim and they all actually get cracking on the club. But Chris, it's been some great insight, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you very much. And everyone who is watching as well, thank you so much for getting involved. Thank you to the super chats, and thank you to all of the community in the comments as well. Make sure you hit a like on the video on your way out. There will be more shows coming up this evening, and any breaking news, of course, will be here on the United Stand. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely Friday night. Have a lovely weekend. Man United can't ruin it for you this weekend. We'll be back next weekend with match days and everything like that. But thank you, everyone, and have a lovely night.